Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. One July evening, on a Monday, Sarah Miller felt as though her life had come to a standstill. It happened quite suddenly. She was quietly grumbling to herself as she sorted through the bag of her husband, who had returned the day before from a sanatorium where his mother had been staying. 30 years old, and still acts like a child. I have to finish everything for him. Why do I always have to do this? Barbara Thompson must have slipped in her dirty laundry to make the return trip lighter. David, engrossed in an action movie on screen, heard neither his wife's discontent nor her surprised exclamation. "Oh," Sarah blurted out loud, and to herself she added, "Well, there's your trusting fool. A perfect family life? Here you go, sign on the dotted line." Among his mother's belongings lay a piece of women's underwear, an item so intimate that the corpulent Barbara Thompson could probably only pull it up to her arm. Certainly not where it was meant to go. This discovery was a real shock for Sarah. It was as if scattered puzzle pieces suddenly fell into place. The picture of their family life, which had seemed flawless until now, appeared in all its ugliness. David was cheating on her. He was using various excuses and basely destroying their relationship. He had betrayed her feelings, the 7 years of marriage that, she had thought, were truly happy. They had overcome difficulties together, genuinely rejoiced in each other's successes, without counting who contributed more to the family budget. Even the absence of children, which so worried their mothers, they saw as temporary. Sarah had married at 18, and only recently had she begun to think about starting a family. David hadn't brought up the topic, and she herself felt somehow shy, not just about speaking directly, but even hinting. But now, adding to the family was out of the question. The problem was much more acute. Sarah was seized by a desire to stage a grand scene for her husband, enough to make the ground shake. Just like that, storm into the room and slap David across the face with this thing. The first surge of anger quickly faded when she realized she was still holding the rival's underwear. It became sickeningly repulsive. Sarah crumpled the evidence of betrayal and tossed it back into the bag. Her old passion for basketball hadn't been in vain. The incriminating item landed precisely where it had been taken from. Suddenly, Sarah found it difficult to breathe. Fortunately, the washing machine was in the kitchen. Overcoming the pain in the place where the wound from her husband's betrayal now bled, she took a few steps and sank to the floor. But what if David wasn't to blame for any of this? Maybe his mother had accidentally packed her roommate's underwear? Anything could happen. Maybe the room was cramped, or they shared a wardrobe. Although her relationship with her mother-in-law had become quite normal lately, Sarah didn't want to call Barbara Thompson and ask if such a strange thing could have happened. For some reason, she felt ashamed. Surprisingly, she felt guilty, as if she herself had provoked the situation. The loud sounds of the action movie from the room prevented her from collecting her thoughts, from calmly considering how to deal with her husband, and how to punish him if her suspicions were correct. Sarah meticulously analyzed all the moments that had been increasingly troubling her soul lately. The most important thing was his frequent absences. For about a month, David had been spending almost all his free time away from home, citing strange reasons. Taken separately, they might have seemed quite valid, justified, but there had become too many of them. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would say something like, "Honey, I'm going to the dacha in the morning to get water. Water the beds while there's water. I'll stay a bit late at work." The boss was understanding and allowed this schedule before the weekend. David mentioned helping a friend or a corporate event. These oddities had been going on for about a month, and for the past 2 weeks, A heightened sense of filial duty had suddenly awakened in him. While Barbara Thompson was recovering at the country sanatorium, he would go to her apartment every other day to water the flowers. You see, it was hot outside. The apartment turned into a sauna at noon, and his mother's beloved plants could die. Even the owner herself didn't fuss over these violets so much. Now Sarah clearly saw the unnaturalness of his behavior. Usually, taking care of the flowers fell to her, but not this year. David, hugging her, said she was tired, and it wasn't a burden for him. Sarah suggested moving his mother-in-law's favorite flowers to the bathroom, where it was cooler, and turning on grow lights for enough light. But her husband resisted this reasonable suggestion. He argued logically enough. Water and electricity unsupervised were dangerous. But her soul was still uneasy. Sarah was tormented by doubts and didn't know what to do. It would be good to consult with someone, get an outside perspective. But whom to turn to? The most obvious, but also the most unsuitable option, was to call her mother. Upon learning of her suspicions about David's fidelity, she would get very upset, start taking valerian drops. Her blood pressure would spike. No, she absolutely could not worry her mother. Sarah had no close friends with whom she could discuss such a delicate topic. She had many acquaintances, friendly and benevolent, but she wouldn't risk sharing her family problems with her husband with any of them. It would cause unnecessary pity, and leakage of information was not excluded. Her reputation as a successful woman would be at risk. The general director had a peculiar principle. Only those who, in his opinion, had everything in order in their personal lives should hold key positions. Harmony at home, he believed, positively affected work. After a divorce or less serious troubles, like a revealed infidelity, employees were transferred to other positions. Formally, the salary didn't change, and everything was clean in the employment record. But Sarah didn't want such changes. There was no help to be expected. She would have to rely on her own judgment. Gray spots danced before her eyes, harbingers of a migraine. Sarah winced. That's all she needed. If an attack started, she would be out of commission for a couple of days. And tomorrow there was a meeting with the commercial director. How inconvenient. And all because of what? Because of this discovery. Or rather, because of David and his betrayal. Speak of the devil. The culprit of Sarah's headache appeared in the kitchen. He acted as if nothing had happened. He turned on the kettle, made sandwiches, glanced at his bag, and addressed his wife. Sal, leave those things. I'll go to Mom's tomorrow. I'll wash everything there so I don't have to haul it back and forth. Let's go watch a movie instead. It's so cool. I didn't even expect it, he said and started retelling the plot. But Sarah interrupted him. She didn't have the strength to listen to this chatter after what she had seen. No, thank you. I think I'll lie down here. I'm a bit tired. Monday was tough. Okay. I'll turn the sound down. And don't turn on the washing machine. How can you rest with its noise? Should I turn off the light? Sarah nodded, feeling the increasing pain. She didn't want to talk to the cheater. David put down the tray, picked up the bag, and left, closing the door. In the darkness, the pain receded a little, and she quietly fell asleep. In the morning, Sarah opened her eyes and mentally thanked fate. The migraine seemed to have subsided. The night's sleep brought relief. Even the certainty of her husband's infidelity no longer seemed as unshakable as it had the day before. On the contrary, the version about the accidental appearance of the underwear among her mother-in-law's things seemed quite plausible. Sarah stretched on the sofa, once again rejoicing at its purchase, and began to get ready for work, while also preparing breakfast. David, as usual, had overslept. When he appeared in the kitchen, Sarah had already finished breakfast, left him food, and was ready to leave. Sally, don't expect me home early tonight. Right after work, I'm going to Mom's to wash clothes, water the flowers. She won't forgive me if anything happens to her green pets. Jealousy and resentment flooded back. She almost pulled away when David, as always, came to kiss her, but she endured the usual morning ritual. Sarah hurried to work. She needed to get routine tasks done before the meeting. But she couldn't concentrate, her thoughts constantly returning to yesterday's discovery in her husband's bag. At the meeting, the commercial director commented, "Sarah, are you not interested in the topic at all?" "Why not, George Davies? I'm listening carefully." "Strange. You have a distant look, as if you're far away from here." Knowing his manner perfectly, Sarah repeated several key points. Satisfied, George Davies continued. While he was speaking, Sarah made a decision to follow her husband. She finished work earlier, so setting up an ambush near her mother-in-law's house was not difficult. The courtyard there was a dead end, with a single road, near the turn to which stood a cafe with large windows. From a comfortable spot, the view would be excellent. David definitely wouldn't go in there. You couldn't lure him into such places even with a treat. Having made her decision, Sarah calmed down a little and hardly thought about the infidelity until the end of the day. But by evening, she began to tremble slightly. The task ahead was unusual. You don't do this every day. This would be her first experience of secret surveillance. At the cafe, Sarah ordered berry juice and a pastry that the saleswoman praised. Only then did she realize that, absorbed in her worries, she had forgotten to have lunch. The strawberry pastry turned out to be very tasty, and the wait became less agonizing. Noticing her husband's car drive past, Sarah continued her observation. Following him was easy. David parked, took a sports bag from the back seat, and without looking back, entered the building entrance. A couple of minutes later, the light came on in her mother-in-law's kitchen windows. Sarah froze, waiting for the mistress to appear. On the warm summer evening, the street was crowded. Many people took a shortcut through the quiet courtyard. Sarah's heart skipped a beat every time a pretty woman walked past the entrance, but everyone passed by. Only a few young men entered the building. Then the light went out, and Sarah saw her husband come out alone, with a clearly empty bag. Apparently, he had waited for the laundry to finish. It seemed no one had come. Sarah couldn't believe that a mistress would live in this modest Khrushchev-era building. It was too improbable, unless it was for a cheap melodrama, which she disliked. Despite the fact that her first attempt at surveillance yielded no results, Sarah decided to observe her husband for a few more days. It turned out not to be so difficult. At least I'll get complete clarity, she thought. It's okay if David notices. I'll explain somehow. On Wednesday, the morning surveillance failed. Although the fact that her husband woke up at the crack of dawn to go to the dasha was suspicious. But Sarah simply couldn't take time off work. In the evening, David went straight home, which somewhat reassured her. Thursday also brought no evidence. Moreover, during these days, he only went to his mother's once, as if sensing he was being watched. However, Sarah understood that it was too early to relax. Who knew what her husband's meeting schedule with his mistress was, if he had one? Mentally scolding herself, she didn't even check her husband's phone. The call history had so many numbers, including recurring ones, that none stood out. Reading messages in messengers also yielded nothing. Sarah knew about online chats with disappearing messages, but there were no traces of visiting them in the smartphone's browser history. Understanding that she was just an amateur, not a professional, Sarah decided to take a risk and try to disrupt her husband's supposed meeting. On Friday evening, she suggested, "Davy, we've been staying home too much lately. Maybe we could go somewhere spontaneously, like a weekend getaway?" David smiled guiltily and spread his hands. "No, Sal, I'm sorry. On Saturday, I have to go to Mom's, you understand. I'll come back tired, not up for walks. And Sunday is impossible. My colleagues and I agreed to play football. They've built such a stadium, like a spaceship. We have to see it from the inside, see where our taxes are going. Sarah felt in her gut that he was lying. Excuses again, rushing off somewhere again. So, her suspicions were correct. The meeting was scheduled for the weekend. She decided to go all in. Listen, that's just great. I'll go to Barbara Thompson's with you. It's awkward. She's returning soon, and I haven't visited her once. After the sanatorium, we can drive around the area. There's your spontaneous getaway. David tried to dissuade her. Sal, you weren't feeling well at the beginning of the week. You need to rest. Sarah insisted. Davy, it's impolite not to visit your mother-in-law even once. Besides, I absolutely need a change of scenery. Sarah really wanted to see her mother-in-law's neighbor. She was adamant and pushed through the trip to his mother's. Barbara Thompson was delighted to see her son and daughter-in-law. They had a wonderful time walking along the well-kept paths among the old trees. Even the summer heat in the shade didn't seem so tiring. Nimble red squirrels, accustomed to people, comically hopped on branches and came down for treats. Barbara Thompson offered them seeds and nuts. Try feeding them yourselves. They're so funny. They use their paws just like hands. The squirrels fearlessly came down to the outstretched palms, delicately took the treat, and ate neatly, looking up with intelligent eyes. By one of the paths, Barbara Thompson, meeting an acquaintance, introduced her to her daughter-in-law. Sal, this is Anne, my roommate. The lady, quite imposing in size, smiled kindly. Sarah could barely hold back tears. The hope that the found underwear belonged to her mother-in-law's neighbor was dashed. That item clearly couldn't have been hers. Trying to hide her disappointment and anger, Sarah continued the walk. Not a trace of her previous calmness remained. After saying goodbye to Barbara Thompson, the couple left the sanatorium. David, completely unaware of the change in his wife's mood, suggested, "Well, shall we drive around the area, as we planned?" "Oh, Davy, I think I've had enough walking. Let's just go home. I'm a bit worn out. And you have football tomorrow. You're not old yet, but you already have to conserve energy." Annoyed, Sarah couldn't help but be sarcastic. "Yes, you're an old man, and I seem to be getting decrepit too." David ignored her tone. He wasn't even bothered by his wife's silence on the way home. He attributed it all to fatigue. Sarah decided that the surveillance on Sunday would be decisive. If he had a mistress, and he was going to football, although he had never been a fan, it meant he was clearly going on a date. On Sunday, David got up very early, before his wife, and woke her with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. When she entered the kitchen, he had almost finished breakfast. "Well, that's it, honey, I'm off," Sarah remarked sarcastically. "Isn't it a bit early? As I recall, the match is in the evening." The man tried to answer calmly and convincingly. "Well, we'll gather first, chat, and then go to the stadium." Sarah didn't make any more biting remarks to avoid suspicion and asked, "Walking or driving?" "Driving. I'm not planning to drink, and I don't want to deal with taxis or public transport. It's calmer for me. I'm my own boss." "Okay, I understand. Then I'll get to the salon myself. It's fine. Have a good time." Sarah tried to speak as calmly as possible. Her husband seemed not to suspect that she didn't believe him and was going to follow him. The parking lot was a 5-minute walk away, and as soon as the door closed behind David, Sarah called a taxi and quickly got dressed. The driver, apparently, wasn't surprised by the passenger's request. "It's not the first time I've been involved in such matters," he said. "But I'll give you a piece of advice. Sometimes it's better not to know something. That's how it was with my first wife. She was always running off somewhere, to the store, or somewhere else. I immediately knew something was fishy. It's nice to be a cuckold, right?" He turned into the supermarket parking lot, chose a convenient spot for observation, turned off the engine, and continued. So, my wife says she's going to the store again. And I think she's probably going to the boarding school for the mentally challenged. Her child lived there. She gave him up because it was hard. Only someone who has been through it themselves can judge that. And back then, like a saintly sufferer in a white coat, I almost went crazy. How could this be? They kept it from me. Both Lucy and her mother were silent. I caught her at the gates of that place, made a scene, and she didn't even justify herself, just said she knew we'd get divorced anyway. What difference does it make, because of the truth or because of a lie? He lit a cigarette, ignoring the ash, and continued his confession. I don't know what I would have done then if she had told me everything right away. Maybe I wouldn't have married her. Or, on the contrary, I would have asked to meet the child. Now I think I could have understood if she had been honest. But it was easier for her to deceive. And what would you have done? Could you forgive? Sarah didn't know how to answer the taxi driver. Her husband's appearance at the store entrance with huge bags spared her from having to express an opinion. It would hardly have been a comfort to the driver. David, unaware of being followed, didn't look around, quickly walked to the car, put the bags in the trunk, and drove on. The taxi driver, keeping his distance, followed him. He didn't speak anymore, reliving the past. The car turned off the highway onto a road Sarah had known since her youth. Another 12 kilometers from the turn, and the energetic Garden Association would appear. His mother-in-law had been allocated her legal 600 square meters there back in Soviet times. Sarah had gone there when she first started dating David, before she was even his fiancée. Barbara Thompson hadn't burdened her with work back then, and now she prefers to focus on the greenhouse and berry bushes. She hasn't planted potatoes on her plot for a long time, giving the space to honeysuckle, strawberries, currants, raspberries, and gooseberries. How could an admirer of Chekhov do without it? Flashing its turn signals, the family car turned towards the dacha area. Continuing the surveillance in a taxi was too risky. Sarah asked the driver to stop, paid him, and hurried towards her mother-in-law's plot. Good luck. The taxi driver wished her goodbye. Remember, everything happens for the best. Sarah hurried towards her mother-in-law's plot and saw David driving the car behind the gate. She rushed to the lilac bushes by an abandoned dacha diagonally across. From there, she had a good view of what was happening. Fortunately, her mother-in-law hadn't yet replaced the low picket fence with a solid metal profile fence, and the plot was visible as if in the palm of her hand. Sarah almost cried out in fury when a woman in a crop top and shorts came out onto the porch of the dacha house. Her figure perfectly matched the owner of that ill-fated find. Smiling, the mistress took one of the bags from David. It was clear they knew each other, but she couldn't make out the words. The betrayed wife emerged from her hiding place and headed towards the dacha, ready to cause a huge scene for her traitor husband and his paramour. But she froze in place. Her father, whom she hadn't seen for a year, appeared on the porch. It was then that he basely told her mother that he had fallen in love with another woman. He said that his daughter was grown up, and nothing tied them together anymore, so he was leaving, taking their savings as his share of the apartment. Sarah tried to reason with her father, begged him not to act rashly, to think about her mother. She threatened to cut off contact if he destroyed the family. It was useless. Peter Johnson left, tried to call, congratulate her on holidays, but Sarah blocked all his numbers. Then he stopped contacting her. From her father's colleague, she learned that her father had quit his job and left the city. Veronica Johnson would probably have gone mad if not for her daughter, who practically moved in with her for several months, making sure she didn't do anything foolish. It's not easy to forget years of happy marriage, crossed out by betrayal. Her mother sobbed on Sarah's shoulder. Can you imagine? He said he met the love of his life. And who was I? A passerby? An incubator for his only daughter? Upon hearing this news and seeing her mother in such a state for the first time, Sarah was shocked. She had always considered her parents' marriage an unshakable rock. But it turned out that all the years of living together could easily be crossed out by one action. A weight lifted from Sarah's heart. The tenderness with which her father hugged the stranger, how he kissed her on the shoulder, how obligingly he took the bag, spoke for itself. This was her, the very woman who broke up their family, or, in his words, the love of his life. David calmly observed this scene. Soon, all three headed into the house. The door remained open, and Sarah followed, greeting them with a voice ringing with indignation. "Hello, private company!" She saw astonished faces. David was the first to recover. "Sal, how are you here?" "Well, I was sitting at home, bored. I thought, I'll go to football with my husband. And here it turns out it's not football, but some kind of tango for three behind the bushes." "Sal, daughter, hello." Peter Johnson recovered. "Very glad to see you. Meet Sophia Sonia. And this is my daughter, Sally, my pride, the one I told you about." Sarah managed to notice that the woman was roughly her age, and she didn't stand on ceremony. "So this is her, the love of your life? Golden hand, leg, or what part of the body did she charm you with? I won't say it's nice to meet you, because I'm disgusted to see her in you, David. And you've disappointed me greatly. I never would have thought you'd be entertaining your father-in-law and his girl at your mother's dacha." "Don't you dare talk about Sonia like that," her father protested. "Oh, please, a delicate violet. By the way, Sonia, didn't you lose your pants? My Davy apparently accidentally picked them up with the dirty towels. Is it inconvenient to wash here? Or is Sonia afraid of overworking her golden hands?" Peter Johnson demanded, "Sal, stop it. Enough with the malicious talk. Your husband is helping us at my request, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's a wonderful, responsive person. He's acting charitably, and you're showing callousness and malice towards an innocent person." "Well, I'd be ashamed to call your Sonia innocent. Stealing a husband from a strong, prosperous family, forcing him to quit a good job with a stable income, forcing him to live not in a normal apartment, but in a dacha house with a bio-toilet and a shower from a tank, and with a man who is, to put it mildly, not in his prime. A wonderful improvement of conditions, I must say. Sonia, it turns out, is a champion of worsening life. Maybe she should get a medal for contributing to speeding up the path to the grave." Peter Johnson's mistress was clearly uncomfortable, but she remained silent. Her father also didn't interfere with his daughter's angry tirade. Sarah turned her fire on her husband. It turned out their dacha had become a refuge for this couple. David lowered his eyes. No more words were needed. It became clear. Her husband hadn't cheated on her with another woman, but he had acted not much better. With Barbara Thompson's silent consent, whether out of male solidarity or for other reasons, he had abetted his father-in-law and his paramour. "What secretive people!" Sarah exclaimed. "How long have you been hiding this dacha haven for lovers from me? A month? More?" "Daughter, calm down, let's talk," Peter Johnson suggested. "Yes, I brought all sorts of goodies," David added. "Let's really discuss everything at the table." Sarah didn't miss the chance to speak again about the woman she hated for destroying her parents' family. "I won't sit at the same table with this Sonia Golden Leg." The young woman, shrugging, said, "Pete, I'll go do some planting and pick berries. Call me if you need anything." David gently touched his wife's hand and pleaded, "Don't be angry, Sally. I couldn't do otherwise. Peter Johnson is not a stranger after all, and he helped us a lot." Sarah pulled her hand away and, without restraint, began to scold. "Yes, he did a lot of good for us. I barely saved Mom after his betrayal. I was afraid she would kill herself, leave me an orphan. And all because of this Sonia. He found himself a viper." Peter Johnson, taking food out of the bags, set the table and remained silent. He knew his daughter was hot-tempered but quick to forgive. Let her vent. Sighing, Sarah sank into her favorite armchair and turned to her father. Well, tell me, newlywed, how did you end up in such a life? You couldn't be lured to the dasha before, but now, I understand, you've been living here for a month? And for some reason, you're hiding? Peter Johnson smiled slightly. You are indeed smart. You understood everything right away. Sonia and I really have to hide. We got into a very unpleasant situation. We're hiding from creditors. Sarah was extremely surprised. How so? You were always a fierce opponent of loans? Her father shrugged. Well, even an old woman can make a mistake. That's how it happened. When I left your mother, Sonia and I moved to her city. We rented apartments, saved up for a small house within the city limits to open our own business. We even rented a suitable space, very good for our target audience. Clients started coming, but while we were in limbo, there was no talk of serious advertising or a PR campaign. We decided to make everything official, buy the house, and really develop. I had little money left. It somehow disappeared unnoticed. Sonia suggested borrowing from acquaintances. And then it was like a cheap crime movie. On the way to the deal, we were robbed. They cut off the car Sonia was driving with a power of attorney from a friend. The fender was dented, but the main thing is they didn't touch us. Ah, Sal, if you had seen how Sonia defended me, you would never call her bad names. She threw herself at the bandits like a tigress. She shouted that if they touched me with a finger, they wouldn't get anything. It was so brave, sincere, but reckless. I was truly scared for Sonia then, and, I think, loved her even more. I understand it's unpleasant for you to hear because of your mother, but I don't want to lie. In short, they morally pressured us and demanded such a debt that it was outrageous. We had to, as they say, run for it. There were almost no options for where to hide. We need to wait until Sonia's friend, who has connections in high circles, returns from India. She went there for enlightenment. One of the guru's conditions is complete detachment from reality, renunciation of all ties with the past. So we had to turn to Devi, as the closest person. I was very uncomfortable. If not for him, who knows if I would be alive now. I am very glad that my son-in-law agreed to help with housing and everything necessary. Huge thanks also to Barbara Thompson for being understanding and allowing us to stay here. No one is looking for us here. We can relax. I understand that Sonia and I are a heavy burden on your budget, but I promise, as soon as the situation improves. Her father waved his hand, indicating he wasn't expecting compensation. Sarah clarified, You just gave up like that, Dad? Couldn't you go to the police? If they damaged the car, especially someone else's, and threatened you, they should be held accountable. There must be some way to deal with them. You definitely need to file a report. Even if it's not hot on the trail anymore, you have to fight against lawlessness somehow. Why are you still so naive, Sal? Her father sighed. Sonia says the local police there are all bought off. If you go to them, you could lose your health or even your life without trial or investigation. But there are oversight bodies, the prosecutor's office, internal affairs. It's better not to get involved with them either. It's like jumping headfirst into a whirlpool without knowing the ford. To get results, you need a connection to someone there. When Sonia's friend returns, then we'll try. And for now, we have to sit quietly. That's how it is, Sally. In my old age, I got into such a mess, I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. Thanks to your husband and his mother for showing mercy. Otherwise, I'd probably be rotting somewhere now, buried like a dog. Before her sat a tired man, not a happy lover. Resentment towards her mother faded into the background. She didn't want to be sarcastic or talk about karma. This man with anxiety in his eyes was still her father, the same one who taught her to ride a bike, supported her in difficult moments, explained math and physics. He, by the way, supported her decision to marry David at 18. Her mother tried to dissuade her, said it was too early, but her father reminded her that he and her mother had married almost a week after graduation. David, sensing that the tension had eased, decided not to tempt fate and slyly asked his father-in-law, "Peter Johnson, maybe we should grab a bite. Let's at least have some tea with sandwiches." Her father was embarrassed, realizing he was treating his daughter and son-in-law essentially at their expense, and added, "Remember, Sally, what Grandma used to say? Using your own lard to grease your own muzzle?" For the first time on this difficult day, Sarah smiled sincerely. "Yes. I always asked what that muzzle was. Grandma explained it to me every time as if it were the first. That was our ritual." "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't feel like eating at all. Too much news for today, and I have work tomorrow. I need to get good rest. And before that, I still need to have a serious talk with David about secrets in family life." Judging by Sarah's tone, the main emotional intensity had subsided. David hugged his wife and guiltily lowered his head. Peter Johnson began thanking his son-in-law again, putting in a good word for him. "Thank you for everything. Go, rest. Only daughter, don't be angry with your husband and don't scold him. He's golden. If anyone is to blame, it's me." Sarah got up from the armchair and froze, not knowing how to act. Should she hug and kiss her father, with whom she hadn't spoken for many years? Or just say goodbye? Both options seemed wrong. The situation was diffused by Sophia, who appeared with a basket of berries. "Here, I picked some for you and Barbara Thompson. As far as I know, she's returning soon. By then, we'll figure out where to move so we don't bother you." At Sophia's words, anger flared up in Sarah's soul again. How cleverly you dispose of other people's things and don't inconvenience yourself. David put his arm around his wife's waist and gently but firmly pulled her towards the exit. Sarah didn't resist, feeling exhausted by the surveillance and the overwhelming news. Peter Johnson went to see them off to the car. With a gesture, he asked Sonia to stay in the house to avoid another outburst of anger. On the way home, Sarah tried not to show her irritation. Her husband had been faithful to her, and she mentally praised herself for not sharing her suspicions with her mother. But how to feel about her father's sudden appearance was completely unclear. She feared his kindness was insincere. Sonia brought berries, as if she had picked them at her own dacha. It was easy to be generous with someone else's good fortune. At home, David tried to please his wife to improve her mood. After dinner, he finally decided to apologize. "Sorry I didn't tell you about Peter Johnson right away. I was afraid you'd be angry." "You were right to be afraid," Sarah replied. "For me, Dad's leaving was the end of childhood. You know, I thought for a long time that I would never speak to him, even if he begged. But then I met him, and I felt sorry for him. Oh, I'm afraid this Sonia is clearly not living with my father in a house with partial amenities with good intentions." David tried to defend his father-in-law's new paramour. "Sal, you yourself understand that judging her isn't entirely fair. It seemed to me that Sophia is very tender towards Peter Johnson. She cooks and looks after the dacha. And generally, honey, I think you're unfair to her. She had a very difficult past, but she didn't become evil. Can you imagine, at 18, she had an elderly grandmother, a younger sister, and a brother on her hands. Despite this, she managed to get an education, even if it was secondary specialized, but a sought-after profession. I'm completely uninterested in the biography of this swindler," Sarah cut in. "David, have you fallen under her spell too? How predictable you men are. A cunning woman will feed you lies, and you're ready to defend her and ruin families." "Sal, you just didn't see how tenderly she cares for Peter Johnson. It's impossible to fake. And how she defended him during the attack." "But you didn't see that. Sarah reasonably argued. Fear has big eyes, and it's quite possible that in reality, everything was different. Sarah was angry and didn't want to continue this topic. She concluded, "Okay, maybe it's none of my business, but I'll say one thing. It would be reasonable for my father and his girlfriend to rent a dacha somewhere nearby, in the same area. There seemed to be options there." David supported his wife's idea. "Of course, you're right. My mother is used to being alone both in the apartment and at the dacha. She won't like it if someone else is in charge on her territory. I'll post an ad in the dacha chat right now, saying we'll rent a dacha for at least the rest of the season. I'll be going to Mom's anyway, and I can visit Peter Johnson at the same time. And then, as Dad said, Sophia's influential friend will return, and maybe everything will be resolved. Actually, we have savings. We could withdraw the money and help Peter Johnson out." "Are you out of your mind?" Sarah exclaimed. "Dad betrayed me and Mom. He hasn't experienced 1/100th of our suffering. And now I'm supposed to give him our savings? And lose interest too? They'll get nothing from me, not money." "Okay, honey, calm down. I understand. We won't touch the savings." When meeting her mother, Sarah was afraid to let slip that she knew where her father was. Barbara Thompson also kept his secret. A comfortable dacha couldn't be found, but David was offered an overgrown plot on the edge of the area almost for free, just for paying for water and electricity. For those who went there for harvest, it was a bad location. But for forced fugitives, it was ideal. Peter Johnson and Sophia moved to the new place. David continued to provide for them, and this began to seriously irritate Sarah. First, money was leaving the family budget. And second, and most importantly, she was disgusted to cover for her father and his mistress. Sarah felt that by doing this, she was betraying her own mother. Keeping the secret was becoming increasingly difficult, especially since in early August, her mother-in-law planned to celebrate her anniversary at the dacha. Sarah was very worried. Their meeting could not be allowed. A week before the anniversary, Sarah asked David to take her to the dacha with him to have a serious talk with her father. She wanted to firmly tell him that next weekend, he and this Sonia Goldenleg would have to stay home almost without leaving. Leaving her husband and mother-in-law, she headed towards her father's plot. The lane there was almost impassable. Many owners had long abandoned their 600 square meters, and overgrown sea buckthorn and lilac bushes had taken over the road. But the lush greenery provided shade, saving them from the abnormally hot August weather. Sarah walked slowly, rehearsing the conversation in her head. Almost at the gate of the right plot, she heard the hateful voice. She wanted to go in and sharply interrupt the conversation, but some sixth sense stopped her. The words of her father's mistress were shocking. "No, Mark, I told you, nothing is working out yet. This nasty Sarah is ruining the whole plan. If it weren't for her, I would have already squeezed everything out of these sheep. And as it is, I have to sit at this shabby dacha, go to the toilet outside, wash when the water in the tank heats up. Worst of all, I have to look devotedly into the eyes of this old idiot. Good thing it's hot. He loses all desire for me, and I don't have to sleep with him. And it's not a bed here, but sheer mockery. Ah, dear Mark, you probably won't recognize me after these months. I haven't been to a spa, haven't gone to fitness, haven't even had a manicure. A real scarecrow. But for this Pete the Fool, this is good enough. I just need to convince him to sell his share of the apartment, and we'll get the money. Real estate prices here are almost like in the capital. This money, considering what we got during the robbery, will be enough for us to leave and live happily somewhere by the sea." Sonia's intonations changed from irritation to plaintive whining. Sarah was amazed at how cynical and artistic this woman was in her manipulation. Her admiration would have been stronger if she were an actress, not her father's paramour. Now it was clear when she was lying. Sarah was almost not surprised by what she heard. She had suspected something similar. Fortunately, she managed to turn on the voice recorder on her phone. The recording wasn't very high quality, but it was decipherable if you tried. By the end of the conversation, Sonia's speech turned into a string of exclamations about how much she missed him. Sarah became wildly curious how Sonia would react if she found out there was incriminating evidence against her. Restraining herself, Sarah waited until her father's mistress finished her conversation. Only after that did she emerge. It was obvious to Sarah that Sonia was after money, but proving it was difficult. She decided not to make a scene right away. She needed to provoke the greedy Sonia and show her father the true face of the woman because of whom he had destroyed his family. Deciding she wouldn't hear anything more interesting, Sarah came out of hiding. She no longer saw Sonia as a rival, only a vile swindler. "Oh, hello, Sally. Come in," Sonia chirped. "I made some soup here, it seems tasty. Let me feed you for now, and then Dad will come. He went to the spring. He thinks no one he knows will meet him there." Sarah didn't say everything she thought and asked, "How long has Dad been living with you?" "Not very interesting," Sonia cut in. Meeting her father on the path, Sarah asked, "Listen to me and try to believe. Sonia is just using you for money. The attack was staged and she's hiding here from a fabricated danger. Here, listen to the recording I made." Peter Johnson listened to Sonia's cynical monologue, and his face changed. Sarah felt sorry for him, but she didn't stop the recording. It was better to swallow the bitter truth at once. "Yes, daughter, technology has come a long way," he said when the recording ended. "Admit it, you somehow fabricated Sonia's voice to make me quarrel with her." Sarah was stunned. She realized that her father's feelings for this arrogant, unscrupulous liar were very deep. Any attempts to prove or show that the mistress wanted to get his share of the apartment would only cause displeasure and arguments. She had to somehow convince him, open his eyes. "Dad, please, don't rush to give her the money. She'll come up with something to fleece you. Let's set up a test for her. Say that the money has appeared to pay off the debts, and you and David will watch her to see how she behaves. It would be good to have a couple of strong guys for backup. I think that can be arranged." "Dad," Sarah repeated, "let's go to our place for now. We'll discuss all the details." Without going into his overgrown house, Peter Johnson went with his daughter to his son-in-law's place. In the evening, Sophia again noticed Peter Johnson's coldness but didn't attach importance to it. His aloofness suited her perfectly. But when the man announced that his son-in-law agreed to give the money, but only in cash, Sonia almost jumped for joy. "My beloved sunshine, now we can return to our normal life. Isn't it a miracle?" David smiled. Everything was going according to plan. Thanks to a friend, he managed to enlist former special forces. When Sonia's accomplices arrived at the dacha, squeezed with difficulty along the lane, they were immediately seized by the strong guys. Sophia was treated delicately. Peter Johnson came close and announced, "You, Sonia, even though your name is Wise, you wanted to fool me again. But you didn't consider that you talked too much where you shouldn't. Fortunately, Sarah overheard your cynical conversation, so if you don't want to go to prison for fraud and drag these fools down with you, return what you stole from me with the help of your friends." Sonia had no choice but to write a receipt. A tired Peter Johnson asked David to drive him to the city and hurried to his wife, buying a huge bouquet of flowers on the way. "Veronica, you're like you've swallowed water," he said. "Let's try to start our relationship over." Veronica Johnson smiled at her ex-husband, and he thought he had found a way to reach her. But the woman suddenly declared, "Actually, I already have a different life, and you don't fit into it. To be honest, when we divorced, you took almost everything you brought into it, and I didn't cling to anything. If things were important to you, you took them. And now you suddenly realized you undersold yourself, ended up with nothing. Even with some of the money Sonia returned,